Kicking off the card with bantamweight fire, we have the man himself, Ronnie Lawrence. His nickname's The Heat. Do you assume that he really just enjoyed the 2013 buddy cop film between Melissa McCarthy and Sandra Bullock?
I was about to say, I think Ronnie Lawrence probably loves Sandra Bullock.
I mean, who doesn't? Jesse James did at one point.
He did, but here's the thing. Didn't love her enough, fooling around.
Poor Jesse James, West Coast Customs own. But when it comes to this fight, for Ronnie Lawrence, toughest test so far inside the UFC's octagon, taking on Saidyokub Kakhramonov, Uzbekistan's own. And I did a deep dive on both of these guys' careers getting ready for this fight because they were already well known to me.
You say that like we don't do that for every fight every week anyways, and I just want everybody who's watching this to know we do a deep dive on every fight every week.
Alright, so if you want, like, out of the gates, your Buffalo Wild Wings fact of the week, I wish they sponsored the show, but this is the fact that you're going to go and tell your friends about. Saidyokub Kakhramonov was competing in Sambo as recently as 2019, and at Worlds at, the 68 kilogram bracket, I guess. He finished fourth in that bracket.
How many countries compete in Worlds for Sambo?
Matt, okay, that's not the way that I'm gonna go with it.
No, it's just, that's my thing about Sambo.
This is a dumb fucking point, because the number one guy was Stepan Kubanov out of Russia. The number two was Merab Duashvili. Fourth was Saidyokub Kakhramonov.
We talk about Mark Striegel and his Sambo background as well. I just mean not all Sambo backgrounds are created equal.
And so I'm making the point that Saidyokub Kakhramonov is cut of that cloth and is actually competing against some pretty damn good guys at that 68
I agree with
mark.
you, but you just got really pissed.
Regardless, Matt, when we do look at this fight, you look at it, for Ronnie Lawrence, the more known commodity. I mean, you saw him on Dana White's Contender Series. He was a pretty big underdog, which is kind of funny because for Lawrence, he was taking on the well-accredited Jose Johnson, and the commentary was talking about Jose Johnson. He's a super polished striker. This is a guy you got to look out for. And you talk about it, Matt. I mean, we're talking knife through hot butter for Ronnie Lawrence in that fight. He looked amazing, but for Lawrence in that fight on Dana White's Contender Series and his two fights in the UFC against Vince Cachero, an accredited wrestler in his own right, and then his last time out against Amanda Martinez, this is the point that you want to hammer home because the takedowns have been there time and time and time again, and Merab gets all the shine. He has the records for the takedowns at the bantamweight division, but for Ronnie Lawrence, it is just crazy to see the fact that he's gone 26 of 33 attempts in 3 fights.
And normally guys who have the volume that someone like Ronnie Lawrence doesn't really have that level of success that goes along with it because that's way over 50%, which is really all you can ask, especially for a volume-oriented grappler. Now, there's some grapplers who go out there. Kamaru Usman comes to mind. When he goes for a takedown, normally he does complete it right away, but he's not somebody who will just spam takedowns due to his forward pressure. Ronnie Lawrence, his striking does kind of work into his own wrestling at this point, to where it's okay, I can crash forward, but there is an end game in mind for when he does get too close to his opponent. And that's the great thing about Lawrence. Now, he can complete those takedowns too after he does crash into it, and we see a lot of fighters, they'll get a little bit too excited on the feet, they'll crash in, they'll go for the hips, and then they just get stuck in that one bad spot. Lawrence is someone who can work his way out of a bad spot, even almost go back onto one knee to try to disrupt the balance of his opponent. It's some really high level wrestling that you don't often see at this level, or especially at this weight class. But against someone like Kakhramonov, who's so well balanced on his feet and so fast with his own footwork, I think it's gonna be really hard for Ronnie Lawrence to fight this fight like he's traditionally fought fights. And that might be weird because for Lawrence, okay, how does he have success? He has good power in his hands. He has great wrestling, of course. I just don't know if he's going to be able to out-scramble Kakhramonov, who, again, just has this great tendency to end up on top. And I do think he can threaten with defensive submissions a little bit more with his game, because if Lawrence is going for a lot of takedowns, the problem is high volume normally does mean high risk, too. And the more that you give your opponent, it's like when Aljamain Sterling struck with Petr Yan. First fight, not second fight, because boy, oh boy, did he erase the memory of that first fight. But when you're showing your opponent a lot of stuff, it's going to help them kind of create counters. Nick Lentz made a whole career out of it. I am a little worried that if Ronnie Lawrence is just going for a lot of takedowns, even if he is getting one here or there, Kakhramonov could maybe be setting up his grip with a few different things here or there, just to end up getting in top position, because that's the thing. I'm not sure if either grappler is good enough to just go out and submit the other one, but I do think we are going to see some long scrambles between both fighters.
And that's the crazy part about it. For Ronnie Lawrence, obviously, he has that back pocket of wrestling. It's a big talking point of his game, but you've seen he's got good kicks. He switches stance. He throws very well in combination. Sometimes he leaves himself out there in the pocket after he throws a shot, and on his reset, depending on which stance he wants to go to, that's when in the in-betweens fighters are able to hit him. And you saw Amanda Martinez in that last fight. For Ronnie Lawrence, drops Mana Martinez. First round, drops him in the second round. And then in the third round, Mana Martinez throws a spinning back fist that drops Ronnie Lawrence. And after that, he throws 1, 2, 3 hooks in the pocket. And Dominic Cruz said 4. It looked like 3, but regardless, it was bang, bang, bang. And Ronnie Lawrence is back down on the mat. Now, what I did like was Lawrence really did a good job of recovering, and he did it very, very quickly in that one. And it should be noted, that fight against Mana Martinez was only 4 months ago. Ronnie Lawrence, weird time in the UFC because he took on Vince Cachero about 1 year and 2 months ago. Had a long layoff, had a fight booked against Trevin Jones. That one fell out because Ronnie Lawrence cramped up backstage trying to weigh in, so they say botch weight cut. Saidyokub Kakhramonov a couple months later. It should be noted, Jones had 4 opponents that fell through. Kakhramonov answered the phone on 4 days' notice. He missed weight. You can see that on our screen, on our graphic, 138.5. But for Kakhramonov, he was able to build as that fight went on, and later stages of it, as Jones tends to slow down, that's when Kakhramonov was able to pull away and end up with a finish victory, which I think ages really well.
Hasn't Trevin Jones got on a bit of a losing streak, though?
He's lost a couple.
That's what I mean. The Trevin Jones win at the time was nice, but I don't know if it's necessarily aged well. I think at the time it was looked at as a good win. It's just, he did lose to Basharat quite badly after that, another guy making his UFC debut. So the win over Trevin Jones, I don't know if it's aged well, but at the time it was a really good win. I say for Kakhramonov, his movement is going to give Ronnie Lawrence a lot of troubles in this fight, because if Lawrence isn't able to get anything going from his own kicking range, I don't really know how many answers he's going to have, because if he does find himself lunging in, be it with his strikes or with his submissions, those are the openings that Kakhramonov can take advantage of. And on the flip side, I'd be curious to see if Kakhramonov does go for any clinch work, especially early on in this fight, because Lawrence is someone who will go for trips, he will go for a lot of takedowns, but again, Kakhramonov might almost be able to bait him into a grappling exchange by clinching, because if Lawrence is willing to off-balance himself going for his own takedown, Rakhmonov has phenomenal hips, so if he is able to then shift his hips and get on top, you might be able to see some really nice ground and pound from that. But that is something I would like to say. Both guys are massive for this weight class. You bring up Kakhramonov's weight miss and Ronnie Lawrence cramping up. I will be curious to see how these guys look on the scale, because I couldn't imagine the weight cut's easy for either guy at 5'8" fighting at 135, because they're both thick for the weight class too. It's not like they're built like Neil Magny.
Yeah, and a lot of people, fans out there, and I'm sure we'll hear from you in the comments section, you're going to say a few things about Ronnie Lawrence. This guy is a fan favorite. He's an all-action type of fighter. For Kakhramonov, the only, one fight so far in the UFC, former CFFC bantamweight champ. He got a big win over Tyson Lin, a guy who, to that point, his only losses were Sean O'Malley, Journey Newsom, Luis Smoka, and Carlos Lozoya, and that's a guy that you're going to see more in MMA. I think he's going to end up on Dana White's Contender Series this summer. He's on a massive win streak of his own. So for Kakhramonov, that's a great win, but I go back through his career. The one loss to Pipe Vargas, that's going to happen. He's a big-time prospect on the regional scene. His other loss was a featured bout in 2018 with PFL against Umar Nurmagomedov, where Kakhramonov was the only guy I've ever seen test Umar Nurmagomedov in his MMA career. He's the only guy. He's also an under 20 2012 66 kg US Open judo winner. So for Kakhramonov, sambo background, judo background, I'm eager to see how Lawrence's takedowns are able to be successful against Kakhramonov, because you talk about upper body throws, judo throws, things like that, trip takedowns. That's Kakhramonov's wheelhouse. So we look at the odds for this fight. Lawrence opened a -160 favorite, -123 right now. So the odds are starting to shift towards par. For Kakhramonov, open +140, +101 right now. Matt, people really eager to hear these Tapology votes. They want us to slow down on them, but they're a surprise to us as they are to you. I'm going to say over under 67.5% Lawrence here.
Other way around, Kakhramonov.
I think it's going to be the other way around. It's not, and it's really close. 621 total votes on Tapology, 68% going with Ronnie Lawrence. Large majority, 89% have Lawrence to win by decision. For the 32% that have Kakhramonov, 46% by decision, 29% by submission, and 17% by knockout. Matt, to me, you've laid out a pretty good game plan for Kakhramonov. Is that your pick?
I don't know if it is, because this is the thing. Ronnie Lawrence has the ability to make any fight ugly. And against a guy like Kakhramonov, that's probably your best path to success, because Kakhramonov, he's one of these guys who his blitzes are good, and when he does do an action, it's normally a very successful one. But he can be caught in these weird periods of inactivity that I think Ronnie Lawrence could take advantage of. Even go as far back as last night, goodness. Ronnie Lawrence can fight almost like Brian Barberena fought Robbie Lawler. He can go out there, he can use some dynamic movement, he can get in and get out and use some of those kicks. Now, again, I think Kakhramonov is probably a little bit more durable than a 40-year-old Lawler, but you get the idea. I do think the activity of Lawrence can really cause Kakhramonov issues, and if Lawrence can do enough to just win the first 2 rounds, that's putting a lot of pressure on Kakhramonov to come back in the third and do something big enough to make a difference. So my pick is going to be Kakhramonov, but I am worried about his output in this matchup because, again, Lawrence is someone who's always doing something, and someone with a low output can get taken advantage of in a situation like this.
And that's what caused Kakhramonov issues in the fight against Umar Nurmagomedov. Nurmagomedov just threw the kitchen sink at him. He was actually utilizing his boxing, which is something that we don't see every day, in addition to the head kicks from either stance, the question mark kicks, so on and so forth. I have a really hard time on this one, and I'm eager to see where we end up with it on Saturday. But again, I like the activity out of Ronnie Lawrence on the feet. I think when it comes to the wrestling, the judo, the jiu-jitsu, both guys are very, very close. I'm really interested to see any improvements out of Saidyokub Kakhramonov, moving the camp over to Warrior Camp the last couple of weeks, working with Terrence McKinney over there, because for Kakhramonov, he's a longtime Team Oyama guy at only the ripe young age of 26. So a good opportunity for Kakhramonov in this fight. I think it's very close. We're split on the pick. It should be an amazing one. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have. And you want to talk dynamic fights. The main event at 155 pounds between Dos Anjos and Fiziev should be an absolute banger. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.